All right. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the Clause and Effect podcast. This is season 3 of the podcast, and you can see it's a little bit different than the previous 2 seasons. We're remote now. I really wanted to talk about a lot of these things that we've discussed in the first 2 seasons with other names in the industry that I really respect a lot, that I've seen their Instagrams and seen the content they're putting out. And today's first guest for the new season is Jon Tattersall, and I just want to kind of thank you so much for being here. I mean, I've seen a lot of your content out there on Instagram. If you just want to maybe introduce yourself to our audience, they've probably seen me send your content a lot to our fans, but if you just want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit, Jon, welcome to the show.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I was born in England. Try and give you the quick version. I tried to play in England, really didn't know much, but loved the game. Was fascinated by it. So this is kind of late 80s, came to the States, primarily to learn more. As many would do, it's not quite as obvious learning as you think it is. So spent a lot of time around a lot of great coaches. A lot of great coaches are very kind to me with their time. And then really struck out teaching by myself late 90s. So I've been a teacher primarily since the late 90s, basically. And just seeing where that journey's taken me. I've traveled a lot to see players, see coaches, and I guess it felt like I was kind of shouting in the dark a little bit for a long time. And then Titleist put a lot of money into TPI in 2003. I had a relationship with Titleist, which I still do, which is great, and was introduced to Dave and Greg, and been involved with them since they opened in 2004. I was actually there right before they opened the first time. Dave Phillips, a great friend. Spent a lot of time with him, nerding back and forth on things. Mark Blackburn, another great friend. So we've been, and Como's a very good friend too. We've been kind of too technical for a long time, and now thankfully the golf industry is okay with being technical now. So it's been a really very, very quick journey and fascinating, and completely not motivated by frustration, but certainly part of it. Like, I just wanted to give better answers, and I tell people I'm not very good at bullshitting. So if I don't know the answer, I try and find the answer. And we're in a great place now in golf, trying to figure out like what's actually happening, and trying to relay feels and thoughts to players to help them get better, and seeing how they do. And I live in Atlanta. I've been very, very lucky we have a youngish population here. We have a lot of players that live here. A lot of players come through and visit. So I've been really fortunate with the people I've got to be around and work with, and constantly trying to get better answers and get players better. So the last couple of years, like we were talking about, I've been a little frustrated with what's going on social media. I think it's great that there's that much information out there, but I got really tired of saying the same thing to people all the time, because I thought the information people were getting was honestly malpractice in a lot of areas. And I spent a long time looking at three-dimensional stuff. I've had an AMM system since 2005, I think. I've had a MAT system, which is a precursor to the Gears system, since '07, and then had access to force plates probably for the last, like really good force plates for the last 4 years, 5 years, something like that. So really got frustrated with what was happening, or what I saw was happening, and wanted to get more involved in putting information out there. And been kind of fascinated, honestly, with the number of players, like known players, that have said something to me like, I really enjoy your content. I'm like, you're a tour player. Why the hell are you looking at Instagram? But that's where we are. Everybody's searching.
Yeah, everybody's searching. And like we were talking about kind of before we started recording, it's like everybody really respects tour players and listens to what they say. But one thing with tour players, they're not the best at kind of describing what's actually happening in the golf swing. They have their feels of what they think is actually going on, but that's more of kind of the guessing world opposed to the measuring world, right? So that's
Yes.
kind of one thing you always talk about is like measure, not guess, right? That's kind of one of your big philosophies, right?
Yeah, I stole that from Phil Cheatham, quite frankly.
Yeah,
But
for sure,
but
for
yeah,
sure.
but it's true. I I respectfully say to tour players, I don't really listen to you anymore. I mean, you're a tour player. You got your name on your bag. You've made more money playing golf than I ever will, ever aspired to. Um, but what I found is that like rich people say, it's only money. Yeah, because you have money. But so tour players are phenomenally good at a lot of things that they completely take for granted. So tour players, for instance, will talk a lot about rotation in the golf swing, but they move side to side phenomenally well, so they never talk about it. They don't even think it's a thing. There's a number of things like that. So, I'm interested from coaching them as to what they're saying, but my job is to really help understand what they are doing and then give them the right principles, and then we can talk back and forth about feels around that. I've said this a lot. I don't think we teach golf very well because we don't explain to people what the actual parameters are, if you will, the non-negotiables before we start. We're standing on the ground, we're gripping the club, the ball does certain things, the club does certain things. We can't change that. We have to work around that. And too often, more recreational players, a coach would say to them, hey, tell me what you're feeling, tell me what you're working on. And they don't know. They're just saying something intelligent, but
Right.
So
And
I'm trying to redefine.
most of them are pushing against the handle so well that their body's actually doing what it should be doing without them even almost not even being conscious of it. Like that's one thing
Tour play
that
perspective,
we've been really with tour players is that we've been fascinating with just seeing like how well they're actually applying the proper pressures and forces to the handle of just how that's creating the dynamics of what their body's doing. And that's a big thing, a big mission that we're on is just trying to kind of almost determine what's conscious and what's subconscious, right? Because I think too many people think that there's a lot of rotary motion in the golf swing. And like you're saying is that there's more lateral forces going on than there is rotational forces, right?
Yeah.
And this is what we're kind of learning with force plates and things like that. And we're trying to kind of learn with our grip technology with measuring the pressure being applied to the handle. And yeah, that's a big thing.
It's huge. When we got 3D at first, the right arm is kind of hidden in the golf swing, a lot of it, but actually measuring how little the right arm bends in a tour player's swing versus a recreational player, and how much force is, we couldn't measure this. We still can't. You guys are trying to measure it. That's awesome. But it's like you're pushing against the grip that's creating lag, whereas most amateurs are trying to create lag by trying to soften the wrist, bend the right arm, leave the club head way behind them.
Yeah.
Which sucks, quite frankly.
It does. When people say lag is the effect, it's like, oh,
yes.
come on. Like, yeah, lag is the effect of like how we describe lag of like almost talking about how the fingers are lagging the palms. But as you're maintaining the consistent pressure, right? Like we talk about how the fingers are the club head and the palm is the handle. So like if you get the fingers back of the palm, get up to the top and just drive your palm, as long as you're exerting the proper pressure in the proper direction, if the fingers stay back of the palm, the club head will stay up and back of the handle. That's lag.
Yes, and the thing I would, Jon Novosels's a good friend, and he's late 50s, and his ball speed gets in the 198 to 200 range. So Jon, if you look at his swing, he's a tour tempo guy. He looks like he's got a phenomenal amount of lag. We don't try and get any lag. The pivot's working very, very hard. The timing of the shift back to the lead side is, if people flipped it and worked more on the timing of the shifting from side to side and kept structure in their arms, a lot of stuff you're saying, they would get more than enough lag. And lag is only usable if you can get rid of it. So
right,
I'd rather people think more that way than the illusion of lag.
That's cool. Lags, that getting rid of it. Yeah, and that's a really big thing that we're always kind of talking about in our lessons is just trying to feel like that trail arm is straightening earlier. Like what I told you, that visual I've been using a lot with my people is like I get them up to the top, imagine like handing them a beach ball and then dunking that beach ball in the water. Like you wouldn't do that with an extremely bent right arm and like a right shoulder that's moving forward. You would keep that right shoulder back and you would be accelerating that arm from bent to straight away from your right shoulder as hard as possible in the proper direction.
Yeah, one of the things that I would experiment with, because I do like that, the first aspect of it is that if the club's above the head and the arms are up here, if you actually tried to push it through the roof initially, that would give you more structure going up. Sasha McKenzie I've spent quite a bit of time with, and the net force apparently is vertical, which is a really tough one to grasp. But the force is up and away. If you look at long drive guys, looks like the handle's going up and the head's still staying down. So it's like they're underneath it. It's like they're like 100%. Pushing it like up this way
and
Love it.
then they're pushing it. Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
like, we describe
That
it as
might be
like
a
you
really
push.
tough one for a recreational
Yeah,
player to grasp, honestly. But if you had them in a small room, you said, okay, crush the ball against the roof and then roll it down the wall and try and then drown it afterwards in the pool. That
mm,
would be the sequencing I would do, because anytime you say from going here, people tend to pull in. So if I can get people to, I mean, I wish I could do it better in my game, quite frankly, but
me
can
too.
you feel that longer, which is weird because you're trying to get speed this way as fast as possible. You think you are, but the best players actually are sending it that way as the pivot's working. So
Yeah.
um,
So what's one thing that you're seeing online right now where you're just like, my gosh, like I wish I didn't have to see any more of that across your feed.
you talk to any tour player, they will talk about rotation because they move side side so well, and the sequencing of their lower body is phenomenal. So again, they do that. They're not aware of it. They can talk about rotating. I wouldn't like them to particularly, but they can talk about it. I would prefer people think about the pivot is shallowing the motion. So if you're teaching people, generally, if you're trying to make money coaching, um, people are saying, if you fix my slice, I'll pay you gobs of money. So it's like a lot of how do we fix a slice? I think people are going about it the wrong way, because I think coaches are distracted by what they see the club doing. So you see the club shaft steepening early in transition, and then they're trying to then shallow the shaft. If you move your pivot correctly, you can feel like the hands are coming down pretty steep, quite frankly, and the shaft will shallow because of how the pivot's moving. So a lot of coaches are making it look better on video, so the client goes away happy, until they play the first time, and then they can't hit it because they're not getting the engine working correctly. So they're moving out. The handle's pitching out from behind them too far toward the ball target line, and then they're trying to just shallow the club head. So the mass is falling behind them and below the handle, and you're screwed at that point if that happens. You can't apply any real, like we're talking about pressure. You can't apply any pressure to the grip at that point. But it could look better on video. But don't go on the golf course with them because you won't like how they do.
Yeah, it's
And
not
I go
effective,
on the
right?
golf course. Yeah, it
Yeah.
isn't. It isn't. And I go on the golf course a lot with people. So if people are slicing it, I'm like, okay, it's a pivot issue. If I could get you to hit strong pulls initially, then you'll feel kind of where the club can be more over here, and now we'll modify where the pivot is. But if somebody's slicing it, the last thing I want to do is make them try and hit it straight. I want them to go strong pull first. They get tired of pulling it, and then they're going to work the pivot differently.
Bowed lead wrist.
Yeah,
Love
lovely.
it, hate it.
Um,
I mean,
you
for
better
some,
be.
but
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean, there's many. So as a coach, we've got to know how to fix it. But I would not try and coach that. I would much rather. A lot of times I'm looking at where the logo is on the glove, and people think if I just set it here at the top, I can then just kind of forget it and rotate, and that's not accurate either. Again, I'm looking a lot at where you're applying force here at the grip. The club head is some area here, and the weight of the club is not where the handle is, it's where the head is more. So if you get that too low behind a bowed wrist, it's just going to pitch the handle high and the head's going to drop under. You could hit it, you probably would hit it fat from there. People think they got steep because of that, and they actually didn't. They got too shallow with the weight of the club.
and it's impossible. It's almost impossible to control the dynamic loft of the club at impact. Like
100%.
most
Yeah,
people, like
yeah.
it's just like I see that so many times to where students come in and they have a really bowed wrist and they're
Mm-hmm.
coming into the ball and they're not thumping. Like I talk about like hitting the trailing edge of the club a little bit more,
Yeah,
less of
yeah,
like the leading edge. That's
yeah,
something that I talk about a lot in my lessons, and
yeah.
yeah, that's a big thing.
Tom Lehman, Jim Flick coached him for a long time. Lehman was a bowed
Mhm.
wrist player, and Jim Flick. I spent some time with him. Probably more brilliant than we realize. Sounded very simple, but one of the
Mhm.
keys with Lehman was he was trying to make him use the back of the edge of the club. So you got, you're coming in a bit bowed. If you're releasing it a bit more that way, it's got some function to it. Um, the other thing about the bowed wrist that's a real issue, I think, is players get the wrist bowed, and then the arm may get back in a decent place, but the face now is pointing so far right of target coming into impact. The players either got to bow it more, which is relatively impossible, or the coach would then say, hey, you just got to rotate through. Well, rotation is not that powerful relative to, gas calls it frontal plane motion, like a Ferris wheel. Swing Catalyst calls it horizontal plane, which is what gas calls more a merry-go-round. So it gets a little confusing, but the if you're trying to put more rotational speed into the swing, generally amateur golfers do that too soon, and then they have no speed, unfortunately. They're then told to rotate faster. We know that the best players in the world decelerate their hip rotation significantly prior to impact. So if you look at what they actually do versus what we're telling them to do sometimes, it's again, malpractice in my opinion. You cannot look at 3D data, you cannot look at force plate data and hold those positions far as an argument. I defy anybody to. It does not hold up. And so,
and that's the part that's really problematic, is that we have all that information now and it's still being talked about, and still kind of this like dogmatic information of like, oh, okay, like bow your lead. If you're slicing the ball, just bow your lead wrist. And I see it's just like these stuff on like social media where it's like, and then ding. It's like, that's just, and it's so hard to apply the proper forces to the handle if that lead wrist gets too bowed, because it's just not you're like applying pressure with like the back of your hand opposed to like the actual like meat of your hand. That's one thing that we found a lot, is like, it's just so hard to push.
Too. Yeah. I actually, with some players that have severe issues, I'm like, look, try and bow the trail wrist.
Yeah.
Because the club gets so far that way.
Right. Especially for better players. I mean, it's already tipped, the weight of it's tipped so much this way that it's like, you got to get right back on top of it to even be able to control the like gear effect of how the club's working at the bottom.
Yeah. And like you said a minute ago, the correct loft, dynamic loft. I mean, you got to, the right wrist is fairly or a little extended coming into impact. A millisecond later, it's flexed. So it's not held.
Yeah.
So if you're telling people to hold the angle and rotate, they can hit it, but they are never going to hit it as far as they potentially can hit it. And you're dealing with a nation of people who, we probably have more hip replacements now than we ever had. So you've got clients coming to you with hip issues, and you're saying, and the primary rotary motion is not the lower back, it's the pelvis, it's the hips, it's the legs. And you're asking them to rotate, and they can't freaking rotate. So test people, look at data, and then please form your opinions off of that. I've said this a few times, but I used to fly planes for fun, and then I do a lot of work for BMW, and so I spend time with professional car drivers, like race car drivers, and they don't teach driving like we teach golf. They do not go, hey, let's get in the car and let's see what you feel. Because you kill people, basically. There's a good reason not to do that. But they give you a lesson, first of all. This is how a tire works, and this is what your contact patch is, and this is how you got to control your contact patch. So everybody sees a tire. They know what a tire looks like, but that's a glove. That's basically a contact patch. And I have fairly wide tires on my car, so I got 4 of those. I'm trying to control how much I spin it, how much I slide it, all that kind of stuff. And that's how they start teaching how to drive and how to brake the car and what the car's doing dynamically, what's happening. We don't do any of that in golf instruction. We just step out there like, hey, you're a 20 handicapper. Tell me what you're thinking and what you're feeling.
And most people don't understand the main objective in the golf swing. Like we talk 100%. A lot about how, like, I mean, if I'm starting out with somebody brand new, I describe to them, I'm like, okay, the basic thing that we're trying to get is we're trying to get the handle leading the club head as the club is basically working at the inside quadrant of the golf ball. We talk a lot about the inner quadrant of the ball with our lessons. And because golf's a sideways sport, so the inner quadrant is technically the middle, right? And then from there, you can kind of work everything back from there. But if you don't really understand the main objective, you're just getting all this information of like, okay, do this, rotate, turn, push. But it's like, what's this actually helping me achieve? And once you get that main objective, then it's like, okay, boom, now we kind of revert everything back to that.
Yeah, I would alter that a bit. Like I get to teach a lot of good players, so they move their pivot well. I find that sometimes when people are trying to hit the inside of the ball, they're just doing it with their arm swing.
Hmm.
So I'm fine with saying that, but I would certainly explain to them the hand path is actually fairly straight, linear. It's going to
Right.
curve because of the pivot. So I've found a lot of people when they're slicing it, they're actually hitting push slices, but they think they're hitting slice slices. So then they don't have club face awareness, and so they're trying to swing more from the inside, if you will, with their arm swing. But it's kind of a block slice basically. So
Correct.
they don't know their starting point. I'm working with a player today who's won a lot of money on tour and won a few times, and he when he talked to me a few weeks ago, he thought he was hitting pulls, and I was like, it's highly unlikely you're hitting pulls.
Hmm.
You've done very, very well. He's hitting face pulls, and he was also on TrackMan. And if you have a swing that is the baseline to the ball to target, and you're coming down from a good spot, and then you don't stand up and get the club pulling back up and in, the sweet spot of the club's going out to the right a little bit too much.
Hmm.
Or for him, it was kind of wrapping around him.
Wrapping
So
around.
now
Yeah, yeah.
so now you've got a baseline that looks good on the right side, and the clubs come back to the inside. So
Mm.
now that baseline is showing a left path. And so he's seeing his ball go left, and he's seeing a left path. And so he's trying to swing more right. I'm like, no, you're coming down very, very good, neutral from the inside. The extension, the pulling of the grip was not correct, so the club kind of wrapped. So TrackMan's telling you hitting pulls. You're not hitting pulls. You're
Yeah.
hitting face pulls.
Right, right. Okay, got it.
And so, but he was trying to fix path pulls, not face
Mm.
pulls. And so
Got it, got it.
so you look, if you've won a few times on tour, you know what the hell you're doing. But if you don't know
Yeah.
your right starting point, you're in trouble. And he just didn't know where his starting point was
Got it.
because the
Okay,
ball
that
was
makes sense.
lying to him, if you will, and the TrackMan was lying to him. So
Yeah.
I've had a few people do that with the sweet spot is slamming over a little bit. I know we talked about flipping and rolling, but if the sweet spot's slamming over too much, if you're on a machine and the sweet spot does that,
Mhm.
that could look like a left path. And the
Mm.
ball could be very much with the driver starting left because of where the face is oriented. So now I've had a really good player I've known for a long time, started coaching him again. So he was trying to swing more and more from the inside, and that club got completely out of balance. So the face was just doing this all the time.
So it's actually doing it even more
Even
because
more.
you're creating
Uh,
more of a gear effect
More of
basically at the
that,
bottom.
100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
And so, again, ball flight's awesome, but if you don't, when we got TrackMan at first, I was asking players, when do you see the ball the first time? So they hit a ball, when do you actually see it? It's about 80 to 90 yards away from impact before the player's eyes acquire it. And so
Right,
now if
right.
that ball started to cross center line, they think they've started it left, hitting it left. They've actually started it right, and it's overhooked.
Mm, right,
So
right.
most
Yeah,
good
yeah.
players don't suffer from pulls; they suffer from overhooks. But then they try and fix a pull, so now they go more and more right.
Right, right. Yeah. They're kind of like their eyes are deceiving them a little bit, like you said, because it's
Correct.
like they're just
Yeah,
picking up the ball and then yeah, from there.
yeah, yeah. They're picking up the ball late, essentially.
Right, right. Got it. What's one thing that you wish you could measure right now in the golf swing that you currently can't?
Well, a lot of stuff you're talking
Something I
about, like
always ask
what
my
is.
people.
Yeah, no. So we got force plates, so we know what's happening pretty much at the ground. We got 3D, so we can tell where the body is in space. We see where the hands go in space. So we talked about it, like Enzo that Fujikura have. They're a shaft manufacturer, so they're looking at what the shaft is doing, all points on the shaft. Fascinating stuff. They're phenomenal. I've been out to Carlsbad a few times, and they're very gracious, letting me in there with players and sharing data with me. And then the guys at Ping, Paul Wood, and those guys have got the it's kind of 2.0 of Enzo, what they call focal, and I can't remember exactly what the acronym is, but basically
Mm,
they're looking more in depth at the grip, at the shaft, at the head. They're a club manufacturer, so like I asked them if they have force plates, so we could measure what the player is doing to the ground as we see where the grip is going, and they go, yeah, we politely we're not that interested in like respectfully, the player.
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
golf business.
Right.
In
Yeah, yeah.
England, they do have force plates at Loughborough. So I'm hoping that they will measure applied force to the ground and when the grip is moving and the way it's moving and how it's stopping. That would be fantastic. And so obviously what you're talking about there, if we knew what the hands are doing individually to the grip, how much, when, and where they are in space, that'd be awesome. If I can show people what's happening at the ground and show people what's happening at the grip, um, I'd
You don't really need much
really
more than
like that.
that.
You really don't. I mean,
You
that's
really
all you can
don't.
affect, isn't it? Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't. Um, are you swinging the club, or is the club swinging you at some point? Yes. Yeah. Both are happening, aren't they? So if we know,
Yeah, if we know what the grip is doing and we know how much
yeah,
pressure you're applying to the ground, then we can basically figure out everything that's happening laterally. We can figure out posterior, anterior. I mean, we relate that back to like the quadrant of the ball we're hitting and the forces applied to that quadrant of the ball. I mean, we really don't need much more information than that. It's like
not
an
at all.
algorithm that we're trying to kind of figure out. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. The
And one thing we've found is that and we've actually been really fascinated with this because we had an original thesis that if you apply the forces to the handle properly, then you'll actually use the ground better. See, most people don't use the ground properly because they're not applying the proper forces and pressures into the handle in the correct way, in the correct direction. So that's one thing that we found a lot when most people get up to the top is that they're just not pushing back against the handle and then against it at impact. So the body's moving so like rotationally, there's no lateral forces going on. But as soon as you start pushing back away from your body, it's like it's happening more as the effect from what I mean, it definitely still needs to be taught. But once you tell your brain that it can do it, it's amazing how much is subconscious in it.
Yeah, I mean that's ideal scenario. If you got and teaching anybody with athletic ability, you're trying to set up
Right. Yes.
the conditions, aren't you? That's going to make them swing athletically. I mean, saying to somebody just swing athletically, that's what the hell does that mean? You got to set up the parameters. So absolutely, I've been fortunate to coach a number of it's a younger population in Atlanta, so we've got a number of people that have played other sports professionally. So pitchers in baseball and quarterbacks. I've coached a number of quarterbacks, and like I've said to them literally in the lesson, okay, I'm English. Show me how you throw a football, because it wasn't a sport I played. And they tell me, okay, you got to get the arm stretched, blah blah blah, and coordinate the arm throw with the body moving laterally, and
Mm.
then rotate. I said, so why are you trying to swing a golf club where you're not using your arms and just turning? And they're like, oh, I never thought about it that way. I said, it's basically a throwing motion.
Yeah.
And if I'm asking you to throw something further, you're definitely going to engage the ground. You have to, So it's there's Sasho uses this, and I really like it because I said to him once I could never understand why the concept of pulling your arms in like an ice skater to
Mhm.
rotate faster applies to golf. And he said, well, it doesn't, because the ice skate is on ice, so they have no friction. We have friction. So
Interesting.
when you look at an ice skater, you shouldn't use this example. You should use the example when they're getting ready to go into the spin, and they're
Mm.
basically they're phenomenally strong. They're on one leg in like a one-legged pistol squat, and one leg's going that way and the arm's going that way. They're trying to get as far away from their rotating center as possible to create the rotation.
Mm.
That's the stuff you're talking about with trying to get the arms away from the center. So now you're creating the pushes that make you rotate. So
Right, right.
they're going into that position. They're pushing the ground. They've got the leg way back, their arm out there, and then as they get the rotation going, then they go into this. But
Mm.
that's when they're just
That's
spinning
the
on ice.
sequence. That's the
That's the
sequence,
sequence.
though.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're not
Most
on ice.
people.
We're on grass.
Right, right. Yeah, we got way more. We got way more to push against.
We got yeah.
Yeah.
When we need that friction, that's awesome. So there's a video out there of this kid on the ice pond. I'm sure most people have seen it. It's on YouTube, where he's out there on the ice pond trying to hit his ball because it's like funny. The other kids are
Hmm.
recording it.
Yeah.
Ball's in the middle of the pond. He tries to hit it, and he does the Como thing of just slipping with his feet and lands on his ass and goes through the water, goes through the
Right.
ice. So yeah, so that's
Yeah.
that's what happens in the golf swing without friction. Chris did it jumping off a 30-foot high board into the water, and that was at the Top 100 Summit where he recorded that for, like, I think it's literally 10 years ago. And so when I looked at it at first, I'm like, I don't know what that means. And I said to him at the time, I'm like, so how should we teach people how to do this? He goes, well, there's no one way kind of thing. So it was like typical researcher. He's like, okay, this is happening. This is what's going on. I don't have all the answers yet. He's a lot further down the line on answers now. But we need friction at the ground to create a golf swing, and we need pressure at the grip to create a golf swing. The ultimate example of don't listen to tour players is if you've watched the DP World Tour social media recently, and now the PGA Tour, which tends to look at the DP World Tour and go, that's pretty cool, let's copy that. They had last week at the BMW, they had a dynamometer on the range for players. So, grip the club like a baby bird. Okay, sounds cool. The tour players, I think one of them had, on the European Tour, they had between 50 kg and 74 kg grip pressure. So that's between 110 pounds and 150 pounds of grip pressure.
Yeah.
A normal guy has probably got 40 to 50 pounds.
40 to 50? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think 20 kg is what I heard a few years ago. So if your exercise is holding your Starbucks, then you're not going to be too strong. But if you're, so that person and ladies and juniors, you got to grip it, So the bird is going to die. But tour players, because they don't realize how strong they are relatively to them, feels light. And then, listening to the telecast, he got tied on that one. He got quick on that one. We should send money to the TV announcers every week.
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
Without them, it's like they're creating a problem, and
that's true.
They're all former players, phenomenal players.
Yeah. But again, back to the players not really knowing how to describe what's going on. I mean, it's gravitated into the booth.
Yes, correct.
It's like, okay, they already didn't know. Now they're in front of a microphone and they still don't know. But
got to sound
they're keeping us employed, like you said. Big thing we talk about when it comes to like the claws, we get really in depth with our students of actually talking about like pre-activating like the hands and getting in a position to where you can concentrate the pressures against the handle properly. See, most people, when they think like grabbing a club harder or pushing against it more, they're just going to squeeze it. We call these like the lobster claws. So we go through a lot of extensive training with our students of just getting them an awareness of, if you take your fingers like straight away, like extending the fingers away from the palm, curling the fingertips, getting this pinch between the thumb and forefinger. And now from there, your hands are pre-activated so they can actually apply the proper pressure. So when you concentrate them and you say, okay, I'm going to push here, you will get the proper dynamics of what the club should be doing. And that's where we feel like that's been a huge help for our students, because most people, again, they're like, oh, cool, I see all this data of just grip the club harder and push against it more. It's like, yeah, but it's a push. It's not a squeeze, right? It's a concentrated pressure, but the fingers are like curling around the grip, and the fingers curling around the grip actually like pulls the club into your pads. So the finger pressure is actually relatively light compared to like the pressure with the pads and how much you're actually pushing with your palms. It's palm pressure. Yeah.
So they, Martin Chuck obviously made a phenomenal business out of making products.
I'm having him on the podcast.
Yeah, so Martin's great. Yeah. But like the ball between the arms, to me, I get that from a concept, but the gravity fit one to me is better, where you're applying outward pressure, not pulling your arms together.
We did a piece of content with the gravity fit, because we were talking about how the ball between the arms is the effect.
Yes.
People try to keep the elbows together, but if they just activate the claws and apply the proper pressures to the handle, you're going to see that the effect is going to happen of the elbows staying together throughout the entire swing. And you can never lose it. That's a thing that we always kind of tell our students is like, it's not like you get to stop. And once you set it at the address position and you push the beach ball under the water. We talk about like taking a beach ball and like pushing it under the water. Like from the testing we've done, the hands are actually lowering 1 to 2 inches, which is actually creating the pivoting action of the club head because of how the fingers are bending back of the palm. But from there, it's like you're never losing that. Like all the best players in the world, if you looked at how well they're actually applying the pressures, if you look at kind of the linear kind of on the graph, it's not changing in terms of like fluctuating at the follow through. Like you look at the worst players and they're coming through and they're losing at an impact, and then they don't have it at all into the follow through. So it's amazing how constant the pressure is.
Yeah, I tell people you don't really know where the ball is, so you're not trying to accelerate or do it. You're trying to decelerate, but it's an inward pulling, but you're not really trying to change pressures to hit the ball. You're trying to keep that pressure constant, and the club is not changing weight, but the force required to move the club does change.
Right. Exactly.
So it's only going to increase. The thing I would push back a little bit, and I'd be interested to see, but like the for the long drive guys, John talks about this too. There's some study that's out there where if you grip the club firmly, there's some psychological or neurological response where your entire body it's like a flight or fright a little bit. So the entire nervous system fires up, which is what we want to do. Back to things that that is incorrect is like, don't try to be calm and relaxed, because you're just not going to be calm and relaxed. So have your elevated heart rate. Now swing in that condition. Nico Darros has this stuff where he's doing jumping jacks on the range and trying to get into that elevated heart position.
Well, Berkshire talks about it a lot. Like, his out rate's as high as possible, and he's like kind of bouncing back and forth. But if you look at Berkshire with his grip, he has perfect pinches between thumbs and forefingers. So when he's pushing against the handle and feeling like he's like pulling the grip off the club or pushing away from him, he's never like actually like this. He's pushing, and that's the thing that. Probably the biggest misconception and the biggest thing that we've found from our testing is like, if you grab, sometimes it's almost the pressure actually becomes less because you're not actually concentrating it in the proper way. In the dynamics of what the club is doing, it's just not effective. Like you can grab it as hard as you want, but if there's a point where the wrists they're not mobile enough, the club isn't, like I said, dynamically pivoting the way it should. That's a big thing that we talk a lot about, is that it's like people worry so much about how the body's pivoting, but what we found is that the more important pivoting action is how the club head's pivoting relative to the handle. Or not more important, but just the kind of less informed kind of pivoting action. People think pivot, it's like, oh, body. It's like, what about how the club head's pivoting relative to the handle? Like we talked about this before we started, is like at impact, when we say like the handle, as we're coming through, when the handle stops and the club head passes, that was a big thing that you got a lot of pushback on this, and we get pushback on this all the time of people thinking it's a flip when the handle stops. And it's like, the handle stopping, but the forces applied to it are immense, right? Like it's not like it's stopping and the club head's just like, whoop, and there's no pressure being applied. It's immense with how much we're actually pushing. But because the trail arm is going from bent to straight, as that kind of trail wrist is pushing against the lead thumb knuckle, that is creating the kind of catapult of the club head away from the handle.
Yeah. The focal machine is fascinating because we can actually see where the grip is going its fastest. There's a good video out there. It's a little bit weird because it's a really tall guy on that robo golf thing. They got Rory's swing on there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So it's a tall guy, so he's way taller than Rory. So he looks like he's really crushing down, coming down. But if you look through impact, it's like the grip goes from there, almost does that, and goes back like that.
Right.
So so the weight, the force in the club head, or the weight, or effectively where the club is swinging through impact. I talked to the Mizuno engineers once. They had an iron barren machine at the club where I coach outdoors, And I said, hey, if the club, like when they're putting back to claws, when they're putting the club in to test it, they're not like just sticking it in and hope it stays in there. Like, they've got a wrench. They're
Yeah, yeah.
grinding down on that grip.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and when they say that's the golf ball there, the club was up here because obviously
Right.
it's not human and it's going in a
Correct.
circle is the grip. So that's how much the club was deflecting down. So they
Yeah.
had it up in the air, and I said, hey, if the club came out halfway down, where's the club going to go? And they said it's going to go like 30 to 45 degrees right of target. So that's where the mass of the club, and it's going to rotate like this through the air. So
Right.
for the club to come back up plane, we're pulling up and in
Hmm.
as we're pushing with the ground to pull it back
Right.
up
Right.
and in. So the thing that I would love to understand is like the left arm's got to be pulling up, the right arm's going to be pushing down. I know it's not quite hockey, but if we've ever taught hockey players, you know how easy
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is because
Absolutely.
they have a split
It's a
hand
push
grip there,
pull.
push pull.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Absolutely.
phenomenal at doing that. So the focal machine too talks about that angular speed. We want that speed, and when people talk, the other one that pisses me off is, hey, we're going to use the pivot to stabilize the face. Well, that's just fantasy land
That's what
because
squares the face, right?
that's what squares the face. Yeah. So the PJ Tour
Unbelievable.
range of rotation about the shaft is between 2,000 and 4,000 degrees per second. So I think Victor Hovland was on the low end, no surprise, and Jimmy
Hmm.
Walker was the 4,000 degrees per second. So even with Hovland, 2,000 degrees per second of closure rate. Really, your pivot's going to like the pivot. The hips are going at their
Wow.
most with
Yeah.
Rory. I think at 700 degrees per second, and that was prior to impact. And then they're slowing dramatically. So that would mean if you go with this theory that the pivot is squaring the club face, you'd have to have hips going at 2,000 degrees per second for the lowest
Right.
guy on tour. So it's just,
Yeah. Yeah.
again, cool idea. Oh dear, the facts get in the way of that one. That's a problem.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
so
The facts, the good old facts.
yeah, yeah, and look at and more data is going to come out but like as coaches, we go, okay, I got that wrong. Let me go figure that one
It's
out and
okay to admit
understand
that
how.
you got it wrong. Like, I mean,
Absolutely, yeah,
we still aren't. I mean, we're doing a lot with how we're measuring the pressures applied to the handle, and a lot of people are, but we're still really early stages.
yeah,
Like, it's.
yeah,
I mean, before
yeah,
this is a consumer product that we can actually like give good information that we feel like is doing justice of why the ball is doing what it's doing, it's still a while away. But it's okay to admit that you're wrong. But there's just so much ego, and there's just so much kind of like people are afraid, like, oh, if I admit I was wrong, then the people will leave. That they're just a little self-conscious probably of maybe their inability to describe exactly what's going on. But yeah, you're right. It's okay to admit you're wrong.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
not
we've
easy
gotten so
by any
much
stretch.
pushback. Like, I mean, I remember doing when we first started the podcast, I did a clip to where I was talking about how back in the old days with Harry Vardon and Henry Cotton and all these
Hmm.
guys, they were saying that the golf swing was like 80% hands and arms,
Hmm.
70% hands and arms, almost 90% hands and arms at times. I think Henry Cotton was not, he said that, but he used to hit tires with his club, so that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah,
But then that just got lost in golf
yeah,
instruction. And I can't tell you the amount of negative comments that I got of people saying, like, what are you talking about? Like, the body's 90% and the hands are 10. I was like, it's just not what's actually happening. Like, if you look at the data.
yeah. I was talking to Novacell yesterday actually, and he sent me some pictures. Like he does long drive stuff, but he sent me a picture or two of Kyle Berkshire, and like the coming into impact, the grip cap was almost at impact, and the head was out of the frame, and then the next frame the grip had come this way and the head had gone completely past him. So if that's pivot again, everything we're doing is trying to get proximal speed to distal to the club head. So if you
Hmm.
ignore the ability to do this, you're robbing people of. You're trying to transfer energy, and the energy is going through the wrists and the hands. Has to. That's the last contact point we have with the club. So it has to. The energy from here has to transfer out. And if you're trying to, again, angular speed is how far does the head go around you. So the longest hitters, the head goes around them further or faster in the same amount of time. If we know the ratio of a good player is 3-to-1 backswing speed to 1 downswing speed. We know it takes about a second from the time we take it back to impact for everybody. So they don't have more time, and they have a good ratio of 3-to-1, and they're hitting it further. The head has to be traveling further. Just has to be. There's no other explanation. It's traveling further in the same amount of time.
Right.
And the body,
we talk a lot about how. Yeah, exactly. The body's applying more force, and it's just so much linear. Like there's just so much lateral going on. The amount of like actually like rotation is just it's way less. And like you said, that's a big thing. Yeah. So
well, how
one
you
final
make
thing.
Rotational forces too is you're moving from the right side to the left side. The left side is pushing what we call AP force, so you're pushing your toes into the front of your shoe. Yep, pushing.
Yep.
Anterior to go posterior. So that's how you create rotation. And the right foot's pushing back a little bit, but I'd prefer it pushed to the right for most golfers. You can't separate the forces. They're all happening. So vertical's happening as you're pushing shear forces as well. But if I can get people to push more right as they get close to the top of the swing and transition, and then push left as they're coming into impact, vertical's still happening. It's not all, it doesn't suddenly, vertical doesn't disappear. Vertical's always there. You can't separate the forces out. We talk about them like you can, but they're all working at the same time. So, you know, swing hard, jump in the air.
Right.
And grip it.
So we're feeling good about kind of the direction the golf instruction's going. What are you seeing? I mean, just in terms of like, are you optimistic? I mean, I know there's a lot of good things going on of just like what's actually coming out, the data we're getting. It's cool that we're starting to see tour players actually measuring their hand strength now, which is cool. That's something that, I mean, 5 or 10 years ago would have never even been a thought to bring on the range. That could maybe be like a viral thing that people are trying to do with, when you look at the NFL players, they're measuring it, but it's just showing the sheer difference of how much hand strength tour players have compared to the average Joe. So are you optimistic? Do you feel like we're moving in a good direction?
We tested tour players for a long time. So I've known for a long time, but they were saying that they grip it lightly for a long time, but we tested them. I think it's tremendous. I think the more information definitely helps, and the public will scrub through things. The free market will figure it out. I think it's still trying to figure it out. I think the social stuff is great. It's kind of brought a lot of people to the fore, and so there was a lot of mystery intentionally around golf instruction for a long time, because that was a great way to keep your information yourself. Now it's like we're putting it out there, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, you better go figure it out. And as a coach, if you're not trying to figure it out, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's why we started the podcast. I mean, we felt like there wasn't really any information out there about how the hands were applying pressures to the handle and how that was affecting the dynamics of what the club was doing, and then relating that back to why is the ball doing what it's doing. So that was the main reason why. I mean, that's why it resonated so much when you said that the reason you got into creating content was just because you saw what was out there and you just didn't really feel like it was doing enough of a service to the golfing population. And we 100% agree. We did 42 episodes of us just sitting in a chair with our compact clubs and just talking about just what we've been discovering and what we figured out, and what we kind of some theses that we might have that we still haven't studied yet, but we have an idea of what's happening. But yeah, it's cool to see that people are starting to kind of open their mind to data and to these kind of different answers than have originally been out there for the golf swing. So
it's great. Peter Finch is from the same part of the world I'm from, in England. I met with him a few years ago, and he obviously has done phenomenally well on social and all the rest of it. And he and Rick Shields used to work together at the same facility. And I said to him, like, don't you feel like it's a bit redundant putting this stuff out? He said, what was incredible was a lot of people saw what he was doing and then came and got the same lesson that gave online. And he said as he asked the questions, he said people they were comfortable that they'd kind of learned some things before they got to him, and they wanted more explanation. And so that made sense to me. That was a great way to kind of go, okay, this is not just stupid just putting it out. Like I got tired of answering the same questions, if you will. Like we were into the lesson a lot before we could get to something. So it's kind of like it's giving people information prior to them getting there. They can decide if they like what you're saying or not, how you say it, all that good stuff. So I'd encourage any coach to try and figure out what makes sense to them and get after and put something out. And obviously I'm doing it kind of more, hopefully not the end of my career, but well into my career. And so, but young coaches, like, do some stuff, see what makes sense, see what people like, and see how it's received.
It's such an incredible value to your students too, because it's like, if you're in a lesson with somebody and you're working on a specific thing that you've shot a piece of content around, you can kind of give them the piece of information and get them to get the club to do what we want it to do a little better. But then you can send them a couple resources of like, hey, I've done a couple videos on this. Maybe I said it a different way in this video. I actually went deeper into it in this podcast. I also did a little like 5 to 10 minute video on my YouTube channel. So once you kind of are growing your client base, you can use these resources to also grow your socials, right? So they kind of like go hand in hand. They're not hurting each other at all, and especially with the kind of advancements with mobile coaching and online coaching. I mean, we use Coach Now, who I know is a partner for you, and I love. I mean, Martin Chuck got me involved with those guys, and I love Coach Now. Like, I don't know how I was teaching without it before.
But the number of times I have to be told something before it makes sense to me, and I'm not, other people are the same way. So we just need to see it, and if it's recorded, you can, like, YouTube was great when we started looking at YouTube, because you had long explanations of things. You could go back and look at it a few times and go, okay, now I can get my head wrapped around it. And most of us, we all have egos. Nobody wants to ask a dumb question, really. So it's a great way for people to see it, go, wait a minute, I don't get it the first time, see it again, and kind of that repetition. And even the best players, I mean, like, for me personally, like, I have friends that help me out. I have a good friend here in Atlanta that helps me out with my game. The number, like, I apologize. It's like, I'm sorry, you got to tell me the same stuff every time.
Yeah.
He's like, it's okay. We're trying to build skills. We're not just doing a Band-Aid session here, and I'm much more into that. I know you're going to be nervous. I know you're going to fail, so we got to do it over and over and over.
Right. Yeah. That's why I'm excited for this new season of the podcast, because selfishly I get to talk to great people like you and keep learning. Like, I mean, I mean, hopefully I can educate some people that I'm having on of like what we're kind of figuring out with the forces applied to the handle, but we're still trying to figure this out. Like, we're all on this journey of just trying to paint a clearer picture to our students of why is the ball doing what it's doing. And that's why it was really great talking with you today.
No, my pleasure.
Hopefully we can kind of keep in touch, and I keep picking your brain. I mean, like I said, I respect the information you're putting out there, and I think you're one of the best voices in golf instruction right now. And I'm really glad that you're on social media and getting your message out there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate. I've been told that a few times recently. It's very humbling, because that's not where I thought I was. So I just, like I said, I did it because I just felt I needed to get it out there. So it's been good. It's been good. But I would be, if you knew me growing up, you'd be, this is the last guy you'd think be out putting stuff out on social media, believe me. So go do it.
Yeah. You're a natural.
Yeah.
So
30-year natural.
So I'm gonna have all of Jon's information linked below, all of his socials. Are you on YouTube?
Yes, the Tattersall Golf's on YouTube as well. I have someone help me with all this now. Perfect. It's great. Zach is great. I record it, send it to him, and he does it all. I don't have time to do it, but he's way better than I am. Yeah. And he's way younger.
Yeah. So I'm going to link, I'll link all your information down below. Go check him out, guys. I know you've seen me kind of post his information out there a lot. You're probably one of the most frequent people that I repost your kind of reels and your stories. So thanks again for the talk. This has been a really good time.
You got it. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yep, no problem.